Because in 1997, I was diagnosed as HIV positive. That's my case and my story. But well, now 2009, I want to know what you guys are going to tell those people to question the doctors, to ask these questions that we're all talking about here, which is quite a very luxurious position to be in.
But I really don't think sex has to do with it. Clean water has to do with it.
To the question that Nicole made about common from, I think we are giving an example all over the planet of a unity, the different views. How, for instance, Etienne has different views to Peter, and we have different views, but we are united. United against what? Against pharmaceutical companies. We are united to save Africa. We are united to save the seropositive people. We are united to save people with the clinical manifestation with AIDS. And even that we have different views, we love each other.
What AIDS dissidents or AIDS rethinkers may argue about with each other is the existence of HIV in the human body. But the premise that unites them is that HIV is not the cause of AIDS. In pointed reference to those who deny the existence of the Holocaust, AIDS dissidents are pejoratively labeled denialists by mainstream scientists. Professor Peter Duesberg, one of the leading AIDS dissidents, has been hounded for his view that HIV is harmless and that recreational and pharmaceutical drugs have been the real cause of AIDS. He jokes with Elizabeth Ely, former chairperson of Rethinking AIDS, outside the Saturday banquet of the 2009 Rethinking AIDS Conference.
Oh, I said yes, you're a good friend of mine.
I'm a Holocaust denialist and a fascist.
Oh.
But
it's also because you're German, right?
yeah, I can't help that name.
You know why they call us denialists? Because they're really reflecting their own stuff. I really believe, and I think I've heard you say, that Holocaust thinking, genocidal thinking comes from what we're observing in the AIDS system.
Yeah. But it's such an abuse of the word, this Holocaust. I mean, it's a bad thing, really a bad thing.
It's a bad thing to compare everything to the Holocaust.
Every little shit is now Holocaust denial. Yes. If you don't believe what I'm saying right now, you're Holocaust denial.
Well, in America, yes. And it's not our stuff.
So what are you denying then? What is it?
Well, I'm denying that people are able to question openly things,
Wait, what now? Like what subject?
AIDS.
Oh. You're denying that they should or should not? You believe in the HIV?
I think that you should be given the chance to question it in the public.
Well, I sort of have it, but I mean, it's certainly not favored. That you can say. It's censored quite heavily.
Before seeing Duesberg as a threat to his career, Professor Robert Gallo, the scientist credited with the co-discovery of HIV, praised Duesberg as, quote, the guy who knows more about retroviruses than anyone else in the world, end quote. Little did he know, Duesberg would publish a paper 3 years later, challenging Gallo's newly accepted theory that the retrovirus, HIV, was the sole and necessary cause of AIDS.
When he finally published his observations in Cancer Research in 1987, he stood alone against the tide of popular opinion and the government-funded AIDS industry.
That is a scientist's best, his or her paper.
For pointing out some uncomfortable truths to the scientific community, Duesberg, once Scientist of the Year 3 years running, academician of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, and holder of an Outstanding Investigator's Grant from the U.S. government, soon found himself defrocked, defunded, shunned by his peers, and even prevented from teaching postgraduate students.
It was first suggested that a retrovirus, HIV, was, and I quote, the probable cause of AIDS at a US government press conference in 1984. Since then, it's been generally accepted that AIDS is an infectious disease transmitted through blood and sex. If, however, as these scientists maintain, AIDS is not an infectious, sexually transmitted disease, then AIDS research has been wrongly directed for 15 years.
One of my researchers went to America and he read Peter Duesberg's paper in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. He came back to me and he said, you know what?
There's an incredible story here. There's a story that says that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. And there's this very famous scientist. He said, don't you think we should do that? I said, yes, I do. So I spoke to Channel 4 television. They said, yes, they wanted the program. We made that program. And it took, well, it won actually the top award. It won the Royal Television Society Award. It was called AIDS, the Unheard Voices. And it had Peter Duesberg in it and everything. And then we thought, right, we've got to go on because this has to be right, you know. So we made another program called The AIDS Catch, and then we made another and another, and little by little, all the scientific establishment just fell on our heads. They threatened us with legal cases. They went over our heads to the head of the channel. They said we were corrupt. They said we were murderous. They said we were causing deaths and that we were telling people that they could have unsafe sex. And in the end, you know, I had to stop trying anymore, and so I left to write a book.
That's a totally different epidemic, the African one, and the diseases likewise are very different in the two continents. And in Africa, it's possibly malnutrition, parasitic infection, and poor sanitation. It affects, there are no risk groups. There's not homosexuals or intravenous drug users. It's just poor people.
So without money, we cannot protect ourselves. So our problem here is poverty. That's just poverty.
Yeah. The partner that he believes infected him, they'd only had unprotected sex once. And this girl died, but she was never tested, and she was presumed to have died of AIDS.
Well, the alleged co-discoverer of HIV last year admitted on video, you can see it on the internet, he admitted.
We can be exposed to HIV many times without being chronically infected. Our immune system could get rid of virus within a few weeks if you have a good immune system.
If you have a good immune system, then your body can naturally get rid of HIV.
Yes.
If you take a poor African who's been infected and you build up their immune system, is it possible for them to also naturally get rid of it?
I would think so.
It's an
important knowledge which is completely neglected.
Later on, he had another partner who he didn't reveal his status to, and they had sex every day because they worked together for about a year, and then she took a test and she was found to be negative. When he divulged this information to his doctor, expecting an explanation, the doctor said, well, that happens because some people have a blood group O, and that makes them immune. And his response to that was, well, my blood group is O, so why do I test positive?
So they essentially redefined malnutrition as AIDS in Africa, because you don't need an HIV test. And so millions of people in Africa were told, you have this fatal disease. And the only cure for it is not clean water, nutritious food, all those other things that many Africans do not have. It's toxic, expensive drugs from the rich countries.
Every so often, a rumor surfaces from some African country or something that somebody in the jungle somewhere has the perfect cure for AIDS. And the perfect cure for AIDS is just to keep people off those drugs. So they make up some magic herbal potion and pretend it was that worked. And maybe it does have a nutritional value. Maybe they're dealing with malnourished people who need food, and that stuff is food. I wouldn't deny that that works.
In year 2000, when George Bush was candidate to be president of the United States, Mbeki came to the United States to try to do some business with the United States. And George Bush told him that they knew, that the government knew, that HIV was not the cause of AIDS, that they knew that HIV didn't even exist, but that the problem was that they couldn't say that to the public because the public was going to get crazy, or that the countries of the world were going to unite it against those lies that were spread by the government of the United States.
It cannot be, in my view, no one has convinced me that HIV is what is making them sick.
Peter Duesberg's science was influential to South Africa's public health policies. Duesberg served on President Mbeki's Presidential Advisory Committee, convened in 2000, which chose to deny access to antiretroviral drugs. namely AZT, in public state hospitals. The failure of South Africa to provide antiretroviral drugs in a timely manner is thought to have caused hundreds of thousands of preventable AIDS deaths. Dr. Peter Duesberg disputes that thought.
If it's such a bad epidemic, the population declines. Here's the population curve of the South African population. This is a huge population explosion. They almost doubled the population during the deadly AIDS epidemic that's propagated by Time magazine, Newsweek, all these wonderful journals, Nature and Science. You never ask, where are actually all the cadavers?
This began as an investigation. The Semmelweis Society International, a group of physicians, a nonprofit group, asked me to investigate allegations that Peter Duesberg was guilty of genocide in Africa. And after having investigated thousands of crimes in Los Angeles, I figured that it wouldn't be that hard. Either the genocide was occurring or it wasn't. And I figured it would take me 5 days, maybe 2 weeks, to figure these things out. And as it turned out, the investigation has only grown since then. Not only did I discover that Peter Duesberg is not guilty of genocide, but that the people who made the allegations against him are probably directly or indirectly involved in the mortality that is occurring on the African continent.
How do you feel right now at the end of it all?
I am as confident as I was when I left South Africa in 1963 that one day we will defeat apartheid. I feel AIDS, and I'm not talking about HIV, AIDS will be defeated in Africa just as much as serious infectious diseases were defeated in Europe.
Max Essex, a Harvard professor, accused Peter Duesberg for the deaths of millions from AIDS in Africa. Duesberg and other scientists responded with a paper that was supposed to be published in the journal Medical Hypotheses.
That the whole of sub-Saharan Africa increased from 400 million at the start of the AIDS epidemic to 800 million now. Did you hear my talk, or do you see me in the talk? At the very end, I put a paper up in which we responded to the charge from Essex in Harvard that is naming us specifically Henry Bauer. Okay, I'm the first author of that paper, and Becky and me and Rasnik, who are all on this paper, Becky not on the paper, are responsible for the deaths of 1.5 million HIV positive, or 2.5 million, 3 million, something like that, 300,000 per year deaths. That's your best thing is your paper. You give it to them, you trust them mutually, and then they take it off print and essentially out of the journal. It would be now long printed based on anonymous charges from the opposing party. That is really unprecedented. I'm in the business now ever since I came in '64. It's quite a while. I'm much more American.
Unprecedented that they didn't publish.
Well, that a paper that was accepted by the editor, set in type, revised and finalized, and already advertised, unfortunately, by these, they all hype everything now, even a scientific paper. I mean, it's a contract between you and the editor, and you give them your best.
In the March 1995 issue of The Scientist, Peter Duesberg is quoted in explaining why the AIDS community has rejected his views and why he can't get funded for research. A whole generation of scientists, retrovirologists in the last 10 years, their names, their papers, not to mention their fortunes, solely and exclusively rest on one thing, on HIV. If HIV is not what it is said to be, many would be rightfully blamed for having intoxicated 200,000 Americans with AZT every 6 hours and panicked millions of people with a positive AIDS test.
Had I taken those meds, they would have killed me and I would have never gotten to be where I'm at. I tested positive again in about 88 or 89 when they actually tried to prescribe AZT to me as well. I refused AZT because I saw it making people sick and dying, and I knew that the drug was making them sick, and just instinctively knew that. And then a friend in 1993 or 94 brought me a literary review copy of Inventing the AIDS Virus because he knew I was HIV positive. He said that it was about HIV not causing AIDS, and I thought, oh yeah, whatever. But when I read it, I already knew about AZT instinctively. So when I read it, it was just put 2 and 2 together, and I thought, oh yeah, that's all sounds like that's what's going on, and I became a dissident immediately.
What's the most difficult thing you had to deal with?
The death of my first partner that I was with since shortly after finding out I was positive when I was 18. We went to the same high school together. He ended up dying in January of 1997 of valley fever, which is also known as coccinpneumonia. It's a fungal infection of the lungs that is indigenous to the Southwest.
Did he have HIV?
He had HIV, and on the death certificate it says AIDS-related coccinpneumonia. But coccinpneumonia is also known as valley fever. It supposedly is only deadly if you're immunosuppressed or elderly or a child, but he was also taking AZT, which was making him immunosuppressed. Any use of AZT is, in my opinion, criminal because I think it killed over 300,000 gay men.
Probably 20% of everybody to 25% of everybody that's on some sort of HIV medicine has AZT as one of its components.
You know, AZT is a carcinogen, and it depletes bone marrow, and it's a cancer agent too.
What is your view about the use of AZT and high-dose AZT in the early days of AIDS?
I think R.A.W. was a drug that was never really evaluated properly, and that its efficacy has never been proved, but its toxicity certainly is important. And I think it has killed a lot of people, especially at the higher doses. I personally think that it is not worth using alone or in combination at all.
Here was this man, a world authority on the toxicity of drugs, saying on film that AZT, zidovudine, had killed, yes, he used the word killed, many people. Now you would imagine that this would lead to headline news and a stream of lawsuits. Not a bit of it. The well-oiled wheels of censorship saw to it that these words were never broadcast.
HIV is, as you sure have heard many times, a retrovirus. Retroviruses are, I think they are the most harmless parasites we know. That's why they have never been linked to a disease until we have now detection methods to find needles in a haystack. In the good old days, when you have a virus that causes a disease, it's oozing all over the place. Because viruses like you and I have to do something for a living. You can't have a latent virus causing a fatal disease. That doesn't happen. So we can talk some more, okay?
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So.
I don't get too caught up in all the scientific technicalities, like the current debate that's known within the movement about the existence of HIV, or HIV does exist but it doesn't cause AIDS. I don't care either way, because I've been positive for 24 years, and either way I'm still living proof that it's harmless either way, or living proof that a positive HIV test is not a death sentence and does not require medication.